Thank you very much, Rolf. And I think what I did when I joined by saying, how was your full day, was I was already kind of biasing you into saying full. So it's a good transition to my talk.
Yeah.
So you hear me right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
perfect.
let's get going. So starting with a story. So we are in 2008 in a strategy agency in Romania. And at the time I was working as a strategy consultant. And especially the story that I'm telling now is about a product that was a drink that we were launching on the market. And this drink was a drink that has this like miracle drink for hangovers. So just picture this, like I was rarely drinking. I never got like really hangover drunk. And I couldn't relate to this product at all. Like this made no sense, no value to me, and the taste was awful as well. So I was thinking to myself, how can I actually create a great strategy promotion for a thing that doesn't tell anything to me? So it took me a few days to get my head around this, and I ended up doing a really good campaign in the end. But what actually helped me is to take a step back and to realize that I was biased by my own experiences, by my own way of seeing the world, and I was actually biased against my product. So this is what we're going to talk today. It's about empathy and biases. And most of the biases actually appear during user research, when we talk to our clients and when we interpret the information that they give us in a certain way. We're also going to talk about some biases that appear before the research, and I want also to emphasize towards the end the impact of these biases on the decisions that we're taking and the products that we're building. And I'll end by giving a few tips on how to get better at it. 188. So this is the number of cognitive biases that is actually presented in this codex here. Of course, this lecture is not going to be a lecture about all these biases, but it's a good reference if you want to get more information about it. This talk will really be about a few of the biases that we encounter in product management and design and how we can get better at it. So a quick disclaimer before we get into it really is this is hard. Like as every activity that is based on more self-awareness, awareness on communication and on the way we see the world, it's really a hard exercise to do and to do it on a daily basis. But it's really very much worth it because it makes us become better professionals and build way better experiences as well. So let's start with empathy. Empathy is a key factor in actually building great products and great usability, usable products as well. And it's actually our capacity to put ourselves in other person's shoes, or as IDEO says, really deep understanding of the problems and realities of the persons we're designing for. And a really good way of gaining more empathy is really to get in contact with our clients, and if possible to really observe them doing the activity, using the tool, or even using the app or the tool ourselves, so that we can actually feel their joys and their pains as well. But even though empathy is a very positive trait for PMs and designers, in some cases we can have too much empathy. So let me give an example. Like, let's say I am a doctor and I'm highly empathetic. So every time one of my patients suffers, I suffer. Every time I need to do something to help patient that will end, this action might hurt them, even like for a little bit, this will hurt me. So actually this is a kind of an extreme example of how too much empathy can actually stop me from doing my job right and from actually taking the right calls. On the other hand, in user research, something that we see quite a lot, and I've lived it myself actually a few times, is the recency bias. So let's say that we've just done some user research and user interviews with 8 clients, and I've just gotten out of my last interview. And in this last interview, this user was telling me, like, she was telling me about this this behavior in our app that is really like it doesn't make sense. It's super frustrating. It's such a big problem for her, and it's really a frustrating behavior. So I got out of there and I was always thinking, we need to fix this. I mean, this is so frustrating. It's the thing that we need to fix. And actually, I went to debrief with my team, and when I looked at the board with all the post-its from the 8 interviews we've had, I realized that this last user was the only one that talked about this problem, and that this problem might not be representative for most of our users and might not be the first one that we want to tackle. And the fact that I felt it was so important, it was mainly because it was the recency bias and the last user that I actually heard talking that made me feel this is the most important thing I need to do. So as I was saying, like, it's really important to talk to users, and what's interesting to note is that most of the cognitive biases actually come during the user interviews. And one of the most common is the framing effect. Basically, the framing effect is based on the fact that as human beings, we do not take decisions in isolation. We will always be influenced by the way the information is shown to us and by the way questions are framed. So an example of the framing effect could be when we ask someone, what did you like or dislike while using our product? Instead of asking this, we could ask a more open question, like, can you describe the last time you used it, or how do you feel when you use this product? So basically, the first question frames our users to really think about positives or negatives, things that they like or dislike, which kind of biases them into some really trying to find out things and really frame things that they like or dislike. A more open question, like the second one, would really leave them the freedom to give a more holistic view on however they what's their experience with our product. Another interesting one during user research is confirmation bias, and I'm sure we've all lived it a few times. It's actually the fact that we will jump on the first piece of information that confirms an hypothesis that we have or an idea that we have. And this is exactly the question I asked Rolf at the beginning. What do you think about this simple menu? So basically, whenever we ask a question like this, and this is actually a mix of confirmation and framing bias, the users would most of the time say it's simple, as you said. So they will mostly confirm what we just said before. How can we avoid the confirmation bias? During user research, it's really important that we treat all data equally. So first of all, if you have more pieces of information, make sure that you take it all into consideration, and you don't just take into consideration the one that actually validates your hypothesis and goes in the way of your first idea. And also, if you have multiple data sources, make sure that you put them all into perspective before taking a decision. Another interesting way of handling the confirmation bias is also to play the devil's advocate. So make sure that you try to look at your hypothesis from the opposite side as well. And a very important practice that I always recommend to all my teams is that you list your assumptions before you begin the research. Before you actually go through the whole process, this will help you be really way unbiased at the end when you already had your assumptions written down. And also make sure when you write down all these assumptions that you and your team are aligned on really what these assumptions mean to you. So there is no like after conversations to have. Another example of confirmation bias is could be related to a question like this. What do you expect when you click here? And the user might say, I think I'll see more details, but good answer, let's move on. So as you see here, we actually take the first part of his answer without taking into account his hesitation, and we take it as a confirmation. So one of the main things that I really recommend during user research is first, do not interrupt the user and really give them the time to talk and listen. Like, make sure that you listen way more than you talk. Like having being in an interview for the users, it's not such an easy task, and sometimes they need time to frame their answers and to actually think about it. So make sure that you leave enough silence moments, and especially when you see these kind of hesitations, when they say a but or when their voice seems a bit hesitant, make sure that you don't cut them and you actually follow up with other questions. Another important one is to control your nonverbal actions. So if, let's say you have you're in a usability research and you expect the user to find a certain thing in your flow, if the user doesn't, like, make sure you don't seem disappointed, that you're not like, like kind of dismissing what they do, or on the opposite side, when if they actually acknowledge your hypothesis or validate something, don't be extra excited and being like, yes, this is great, yes, you're on the right path. Just make sure that you are as neutral as possible. Okay, this is very important, so that we don't bias them into going on a path that is something that we have imagined, because this will not actually validate. And another one that is harder to do now that we are mostly online, but it's still very important, is to observe the user. Most of the time, the user will say something, but they will have an attitude or tone of the voice or a certain mimics on their face that will say the opposite or something different. So make sure that you are you pay a lot of attention to all of these. Even when you're online, you can still see a lot of hints. So as I was saying, we talked about biases during user research, but what's interesting to note is that a part of the cognitive biases appear before the research, in the process of actually choosing the users that we want to test on. So one of the biases that appear when choosing is what we call sampling bias or selection bias. And it's actually the fact that we will leave a part unconsciously, a part of the population. And this is a common example with, for example, face recognition tools that didn't recognize Black people's faces at the beginning, or AI that sometimes didn't recognize female voices, or toys for kids that don't recognize kids' voices. So an interesting example is car seats, for actually car seat belts. It's interesting to note that for a pretty long time, these were designed by men and tested on men. And this didn't actually take into account the morphology of the woman body, and especially of the pregnant woman, which made it a bit tricky, or sometimes like actually less safe for them to drive. So it is actually until pretty recently that they are testing this on both women and men. So I think it's just an interesting example that shows that, or that shows already that there's an important impact on our users if we actually do not take into account all these different biases. Another one when choosing who we want to interview is the membership bias. So it's simply based on the fact that the most popular person will not be the most representative. So for example, a few years ago, I was building an internal tool for support teams. So I went to the support manager and I told them, like, I want to talk to your people, like just put me in contact with a few of them. And he put me in contact with the most effective and the best workers he had in his team. And we actually realized that during the interviews and later on when building the product that they weren't the most representative. So I think what's important whenever you have the chance to talk to users and also to choose the users that you want to talk to, make sure that you are very specific on how you want to choose them, on how diverse you want them to be as well. So now that we've talked about a few of these biases, I want us to really start being very conscious of the impact of these biases. So I think one of the first that comes to mind is money. If we don't actually take the right decisions, if we don't interpret our users' behavior and answers properly, we will not find product market fit. We will actually invest time or money into building features that will, or creating different paths or design in the products that will not actually work for our users. So we can lose a lot of money. But another very important part is the impact that this can have on the users. So I have a couple of examples here, and one is actually a feature that Google released a few years ago, which was a Google Maps cupcake. So basically here, whenever I went from point A to point B, Google would tell me how many calories I would burn and how many cupcakes this meant. So as soon as this was released, it was really had a lot of very negative comments, and most of them were related really to this seems to be a perpetuation of the diet culture. And also something even more impactful was for people that really have eating disorders, and they are really like seriously ill related to this. So you can only imagine the impact on people that have this kind of issues. And without saying, the cupcakes were very pink and like seemed very like not very gender equal either. So of course Google took this out very, very quickly after. I think it's an interesting example of how we think holistically of who we want to test and what the impact of our product will be. Another example is Barbie. A few years ago, Barbie answered the ask of a lot of kids who were saying, I want to talk to Barbie and I want Barbie to talk to me. So they launched Hello Barbie, which was an AI-trained doll that was talking to the kids. And Barbie would have a few topics of conversation, and that would go like this. Let's say that girl says to Barbie, Barbie, I want to talk about science. Well, Barbie would say a basic phrase about science, and then she would say something like, oh, let's talk about something cooler. Let's talk about fashion. So I think this is also a great example of the impact that this can have on, and in this case, is on our kids, on generations of kids and girls, and on how they would see the world by the way that actually we build the product and we trained these models in a like sometimes a bit biased way, right? So I'll let you thinking about all the different impacts, and I'm sure you all have seen a lot of interesting examples like this. I just want to, I'm just looking at the time, I think we're good, to very briefly give a few tips on how we can get better at it. So I think the first one for me is really the mindset. We always think we know a lot of things, but actually whenever I go and talk to some users or whenever I start a new project, I try to think I should know less. I know nothing. I'm super open and I just want to listen to this person that is in front of me. I just want to understand their point of view, their reality, their needs, and so on. And this is very important because if I go there, you know, like with the drink at the beginning and I'm like, this is not good, this is unuseful, I will definitely not be very open to hear what other people have to say. Another little tool that you can create for yourself and you can use is what I call a pre-interview biases check. So this can be just a Word one pager or an Excel spreadsheet where you write names of a few biases that you think you might encounter during your research, and just one or two phrases that would be an example of these. You don't need to go too far. You can just list the 4 or 5 main ones that you think you're the most prone to. And the idea is just that you spend a couple of minutes reading through these just before the interview. Like this, you can actually just put yourself in the mindset of like, how can I be more aware of this? Something you can also do before the interview is to do just to do a dry run with a colleague from your team. And in this case, while actually repeating the questions in a safe space and interacting with someone from your team will also make you more aware on on how you ask the questions and how you how you interpret the answers as well. Another technique is called Bring the Troublemaker, and was introduced by the guys at Google Ventures. This one works best mostly for internal workshops or for internal meetings. And the idea is to think who might cause trouble or if he or she isn't included. And when I say trouble, it's not someone who will just look for trouble for the sake of trouble. It's just someone who will have a different opinion, a really distinctive view. Which could really enrich the conversation and bring you to better solutions. And if you really get to be very inclusive in the meeting with this troublemaker between brackets, this will really give you a big win-win on how to go forward. Another method that you can use, and actually there are a lot of different like I would say variations or tools that are similar, like the empathy mapping and so on, is what we call the what, how, why method. So during research, it's just a way of expanding, just not like only listening and taking a note of what the user says. It's important to try to understand what is happening, how is the person doing a certain action, and also why, trying to interpret the scene. So really putting more context around what's happening will also help you be less biased and understand better the more holistic view. And very last tip is the decision journal. So basically, I've seen this used in different ways. Sometimes product leaders use it like a one-pager decision journal for some key decisions, where they will actually write down the decision and what they took into account and what were the hypotheses for this decision. And it's something that they can go back in a few months in order to understand like what they could change if they have to take this decision again. This kind of decision journal is also, I use it very well with my teams during usability testing. So as I was saying, we will also list the assumptions always before the test. So we will have a list of these assumptions, and for each of the assumptions and each of the person we interview, we will say yes, validated, not validated, or not clear. So what we'll do at the end of all the interviews is that we're going to put a decision into it. So we're going to have 3 other columns there, which would be if, for example, for an assumption, most of the users validated it, it will be we keep it. It's validated, we keep it, and we develop it. If most of the users dismissed this hypothesis, it will be we kick it and we don't develop it. And if most of the users said yes, but there were some changes or some nuances to it, we will say, okay, we might keep it, but we change it and we iterate on it before actually building it. So this is just another way of using kind of a decision journal into the decision making and making it less unbiased, because it's very like number of users, they said yes or no, or how did it happen, in a very granular way. So this takes me to the end of my presentation, and I would like just to leave you with a thought here. I know, like, we are all biased. We will always be. So we will not be able to be completely unbiased on every interaction or on every decisions we take. But just trying to be more aware of the way we see things and the way we take decisions can actually have a huge impact on us as humans, as professionals, and also on the products we build, which have a big impact on the people around us as well. So thank you very much. I'm open to take questions just afterwards.